Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats as the program will begin shortly. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, final warning, please take your seats as the program is now going to begin. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage Tina Quigley.
Can you hear me? Well, thank you so much for coming to our presentation this morning, the 2022 Perspective event. For those of you who don't know, LVGEA is celebrating its 10th year as LVGEA. However, the organization as a whole, as an economic development agency, has been around for 66 years. And if you think about it, in those 66 years, we're a community that has gone through all kinds of boom and bust cycles, critics and cynics. I don't know, I wasn't here at the time, but I remember hearing about when Circus Circus opened and the headline read, "Vegas is overcapacity, we'll never fill these rooms," right? And then same kind of thing happened when the Mirage came in the next cycle of rooms. So that we've had critics, we've had cynics, we've had threats to our market. We've had Indian gaming, we've had Macau, we've had online gaming. We've always kind of overcome those threats due to the ingenuity of the leaders who have gone before us and the agility and the ability to pivot here in Southern Nevada. But at this perspective, we're going to share with you the fact that the threats moving forward are not necessarily man-made. The threats moving forward for us are not market-induced. They are our resources. And we're going to have a pretty serious, we're going to start having more community conversations on these very serious issues from the LVGEA. You'll hear more and more sharing information on these issues, monitoring them, and sharing with you what we can do to move forward. So those issues, as you know, are land. Is that showing up? Land, if you talk with John Restrepo from RCG Economics, he will share with you that we have got about 8 years of supply left for employment-based land, not residential, if we continue to grow at the rate that we're growing. Workforce, talent is a serious issue for our region. We're getting to the point where we need to be not just worried about supplying workforce for companies we're trying to attract, but just maintaining workforce for the companies that we have here, making sure that we can pump out talent that is appropriate for their needs. The role of the Economic Development Agency nationwide actually has kind of shifted from being an agency that needs to be focused on jobs, 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 bringing jobs into our community, into workers, workers, workers. And we are certainly not unaffected by that. And the last resource that we read a lot about and we know is on the top of our minds, and we know that something has to happen, and we know we need to have conversations about it, and we probably keep thinking, well, it's a drought, or the government will take care of us, or there'll be an answer, there'll be an invention, there'll be desalinization, there'll be something. And we're going to start to talk about the fact that it isn't just a drought, that it is in fact a drying climate, and it's not going away. Last night, we had the ability, a small group of us had the ability to have dinner with our guest speaker today, one of our keynote speakers, Cindy Wallace-Lage, who is a renowned international global water expert. We had the opportunity to have a very intimate conversation with her. And she left us with this thought that really stuck. She said, the whole world is watching, the water geeks, so people who care about water, the water economy. The whole world is watching you to see what you do. There are cynics, there are skeptics. They're looking to see how a desert community can survive and thrive. And I kind of thought to myself, well, if God was to pick a community, a city, that he wanted to inspire the rest of the world with what can be done, I think he probably chose the right city, because we do have the ability to be agile, to shift, to pivot. We have the opportunity to show the world the best in class in how a desert community can survive and thrive. And I know it sounds scary, it sounds like, but at the same time, you guys, we're like, don't you feel like we can do this? And it's almost exciting to have the stage that the world is watching to show that it can be done and that we can do it. We have the ability to really put ourselves on the map for something beyond just gaming and hospitality, but the fact that we can shift and survive and pivot. So a couple thoughts as I was leaving last night from our dinner. I always tell people that we're a population of 2.5 million, but I know all 50 of you. Because really, and it's true, right? You guys know it, that we're all just 1 degree away from knowing somebody that we need to know. Any of you in this audience, if I don't know you now, I just have to ask one person and I'd be connected to you. That is really neat. That's unusual. Other communities are not like that. So there are currently 700 of us in this room. So if we have if we don't have the ability to actually shift the mindset that for a community, nobody can do it. That sounds too negative. We are 700 people who are going to shift the mindset of this city as it relates to our resources, and we're going to show the world that we can do it. Yeah, that's what I was going to say. And so we're Las Vegas, right? I know. I get so excited. So whether you've been here for 6 months or 60 years, you guys know we have the culture to get it done. So yes, a lot of pressure, and the world is watching, but if anybody can do it, we can do it. Okay, so those are the Tina comments. Now I have to move on to the more formal stuff then. So our speakers, data and analysis today is going to help us understand how we shift moving forward. You have our perspective data book in front of you, which is our region's market analysis and guide as to what's going on. I have to a really big thank you to Applied Analysis, who puts together that book for us with all that really rich data. And in particular, Rachel and Ashley. I don't know if you guys are here, but if you are, could you stand up? Rachel, Ashley. These guys work, thank you. They put, you guys, I know how hard that you have worked on this document and the deadlines and the coordination, the communication, the graphics, so thank you so much. Also want to share with you, so our speakers coming up today, really powerful speakers. We have got Dr. Darian Pollard from our president of Nevada State College, who can give us a national perspective on higher education and also workforce development moving forward. Again, we've got Cindy Wallace-Lage, internationally renowned global water expert, who's going to talk to us about the mind shift we do need to make. And of course, Brian, the infamous and famous and legendary Brian Gordon from Applied Analysis, who is going to share with us our economic outlook for the region. So thank you to our speakers moving forward. Also shout out for our Prospective Council members, specifically Betsy Fretwell from Switch, who is also my boss and our chair of LVGEA. Yeah, so thank you. Steve Westerman from Cox, because Cox is always, Steve, where are you? Steve is, and Cox are always a very generous sponsor for us. Ed Fernandez from Channel 13, Action News. Ed, thank you. Shannon Peterson from Nevada State Bank. Yay, thank you for your partnership. Brian Formasano from Wells Fargo. And Applied Analysis, Brian Gordon and your team, you are always great sponsors. So thank you so much. And a larger group of our sponsors as well, who I won't read off, but thank you because you make this happen. LVGEA is a membership-based organization, an investor-based organization. We only can do this because of the sponsors, so I just want to say thank you. And thank you to the team. We are a very lean team, and they execute just precision, with precision execution. So thank you. That's it. I think now I have to go back to my notes to figure out what the next, don't be mad. So next I am going to turn it over to Shannon Peterson. Thank you, Shannon, who's going to introduce our next speaker.
I'll save you, Tina. Good morning. Wow, it feels pretty electric in the room this morning. The energy's great. I don't know if we're all just pumped up on coffee or if it's just Tina and I, or if we're just excited for our lineup of great speakers here this morning. Wow, that light is bright. Good morning. I'm Shannon Peterson, Corporate Banking Director with Nevada State Bank. And Nevada State Bank is absolutely proud to be one of the key sponsors this morning. We, like all of you in the room and the LVGEA, are huge supporters and cheerleaders of our community here in Southern Nevada today and for many years to come. We have a vested interest in education, and what better event than this morning to be a sponsor and a part of. And it is my honor to be able to introduce to all of you our first amazing keynote speaker this morning, Dr. Darian Pollard, President of Nevada State College. She brings a broad expertise in higher education and a national perspective on workforce development, having previously served as Commissioner of American Association of Community Colleges and Washington Higher Education Secretariat's Working Group on Persistence and Completion. Dr. Pollard began her tenure with Nevada State College in August of 2021, almost 1 year, girl, and is the first Black female president of any Nevada system of higher education institution. She told me I better have the short version. I said, nope, we're not doing that. Previously, Dr. Pollard served as president of both Montgomery College in Maryland and Los Politos College in California. And without further ado, it's my honor to present to all of you Dr. Darian Pollard.
Well, good morning, everyone. Okay, we're going to have to try this again. So, I grew up in the Black Baptist Church, and part of that means you have to get energy from people in the room. So, I need an amen from someplace. So let's try it again. Good morning, everyone. Good morning. I haven't had an adequate amount of caffeine yet, so this is just me on a natural high, and I'm hopeful that you can appreciate that. I also want to tell you that this will be your first quiz, that you will be able to recognize me at different places, that you may see me, because all of this black girl magic changes all the time. So you already saw I had a different hairstyle. That will happen at least 10 more times in the next year. So I just want you to be prepared for that, but the name doesn't change and the message will not change. I'm going to talk a little bit about talent, and I loved Tina's introduction. When we talk about resources, we oftentimes talk about, as we should be, water and land, and we talk about business, we talk about the ecosystem that exists with that. I would offer to you that the primary focus of what we should also be thinking about, if we did pick our top three, talent is at the root of that. Every business leader that I speak with, they will continuously say that they need people to do the work, and do they have the right people to do that? I've spent over 25 years in higher education, and one of the things I've learned in this is that part of my job as a president of a college, or when I was a faculty member in the classroom, was to help produce the next generation of talent. So I've done that in 3 institutions of higher education where I've served as president. Most recently, as was stated, in Montgomery County, where I was the president there for 11 years. As I was prepping with my team about this, one of them said, make sure you say that, because it's important for people to know that you have staying power. And that's an important thing as a region, that we recognize that. While I represent proudly your state college in being here as the president, this is not going to be a Nevada State commercial. I'm hopeful that I'll be invited to do that another time. What I am going to do, though, is talk about the higher education environment that we're in, because I would offer to you today that it is bigger than just one institution. It is bigger than even a region. For us, it is about the state. So I'm going to cover a little bit about my experience in working in the DMV, as we call it, the DC, Maryland, Virginia area, where we were able to attract Amazon HQ2, and I have a very specific purpose for talking about that. I understand it might be sensitive to people here in the room. I'm going to talk about a lens by which we might think about how communities come together to talk about talent And then I'm going to talk a little bit about where we might learn from other markets about how to do this. So when Amazon announced that it was going to build its second headquarters and to really help drive its growth and development, everybody in the economic development landscape and that ecosystem just blew up. They all started to race to figure out who was going to be able to attract them. And what was very important about that, I think it gives us some lessons about how we think about talent and how integral talent is in the work of economic development. As someone who actually sat at the table with our counterparts, I was a part of Maryland's team that was trying to recruit Amazon to Maryland. We quickly realized that it didn't make a difference if they landed in Maryland or Virginia, because we were just a river apart from each other. It was the fact that we needed them in the region, and we had to start talking about the work that we were doing collectively in that space. I know that we worked on that project here as well, but what I think there are 3 key reasons as to why Amazon chose the DMV area, because it wasn't about the tax structure. Every state who was trying to recruit them put together robust taxes that many of us can't even begin to think about what that package would even look like. But it were 3 things that I heard continuously when I sat down with the leadership of those folks and they brought the higher ed folks to the table. First and foremost, their number 1 issue was talent. Access to highly qualified, engaged, and committed talent. What they had obviously saw was that in particular this region, DC, in particular though Virginia and Maryland, had made significant investments in this K-12 and higher education ecosystem. They knew that that would give them an opportunity to not only hire and bring C-suite people to that area, but more importantly, all of the folks that are necessary to build out a headquarters, accountants, managers, analysts, programmers, technicians, they would all be able to come from that area. They knew that this was important because they had seen the investments that had been made in the K-12 space and the tight synergy between those institutions. The fact that we were at the table together having robust conversations and understood how essential we were to the ecosystem of economic development in the region. Secondly, and I thought this was a particularly important point that we noted as well, they were deeply concerned about the region's ecosystem. They didn't just say, okay, where is the package that's going to be coming to help us financially build our headquarters and all of, I call them baby Amazons who will be coming after Amazon to that location. They wanted to know about how their quality of life of their employees would be impacted. Where would children play? Would they have access to adequate transportation systems? Would they have relatively low crime? Would they have a robust medical infrastructure? It was the entire ecosystem that they were most interested in. Amazon knew that wherever they chose to go, they were going to get a tax break. But they were really sold on not just a business model that focused on just the business environment. They wanted to look at collaboration of the region and overall talent development. While the project did affect and cross state lines, we then developed our responses collectively to that. And the packages that you saw in terms of developing and recruiting them to the area spoke deliberately about all of the community assets that were essential to a business environment. We saw the project not as a win for Virginia, but for the region itself. In fact, Maryland did not get it. It went to Virginia. You would never know that, though, when people talk to you from that area. They all claim it because they see the beneficiary of that for the entire region. Third, and this was the thing that was so poignant to me that I would offer to you as probably most important, and they said this to us over and over and over. It wasn't the fact that the business environment and the ecosystem was important. It wasn't even just the fact that they knew we had deep investments in the K-12 space. It was the fact that we were gloriously and unabashedly diverse. We celebrate that. In fact, if you were to look at any piece of marketing material that comes from that region, the DMV, you would see that they speak about the diversity of that area. The institution where I was the president at, we had students from over 162 countries at that campus. We were trying to get to the UN. Couldn't quite figure out the UN has about 202, 212 countries. Nobody really knows. Y'all know the stands keep changing and rechanging. But what was very interesting to me about that is that we knew for a fact that diversity was not just something that we stuck on and said, oh, we're diverse. And then we talk about it as a deficit because we're diverse, but we spoke and we speak of diversity from that region as our superpower. We speak of it from a place of abundance. We recognize that at the end of the day, our greatest asset is that every business owner knows this. They try to surround themselves with diverse teams that not only bring high competency, but excellence about the work they do. So for us in this region, and you will see it every time they speak, diversity was a core competency, and they also saw it as a way to really maximize and define who they were as a region. So I would offer to you that there are 3 lessons in that Nevada could learn as we think about our region. Instead of referring to education as a factor, that we need to understand that education by far is the most critical driving force in securing business headquarters of this magnitude. So one of the things you will hear me say unabashedly is I will always be the public school system's greatest champion. I might also be a compassionate critic, but I'm also going to be very thoughtful about the fact that we are all in this together. And when we otherize each other, at the end of the day, it does nothing for the bottom line. So let me offer to you in this as well. Instead of referring to our business environment, we need to be talking about our economy as an innovation ecosystem. Things that are woven together that enhance the quality to life, that is about mutuality and interdependence. We need to recognize that we have an even deeper appreciation and sense of pride for the diversity of this region. That we don't talk about it as an add-on, that we talk about it as a core value. That we center it as the way that we not only talk about the people who are in the room, but the experiences they have and the quality of life while they're here. A talent ecosystem is a different way of thinking about this work. Dr. Tappan Monroe is a noted economist who recently passed not too long ago, but he wanted to understand why Silicon Valley became a source of innovation and an economically powerful region. He wanted to know if there were regions that could imitate this, and if there are lessons that could be learned to help other parts of the country do this work. And he identified 7 key factors, which have since been used in numerous economic development proposals and plans. One that I think that we could learn from here in the greater Las Vegas region, if we're going to be a more resilient economy. Dr. Monroe intentionally used the word ecosystem, and you've heard me say that over and over again, even in my 13 minutes of speaking right now. He talked about the fact that it is a complex mutuality of interplay, and that we must continuously think about how it all works together. At the top of our ecosystem, there's workforce, and we know that no business could thrive without having the talent to do the work of which it is trying to do: goods, services, experiences, knowledge economy. It is all dependent on having people. The absence of this awareness breeds stress. You only have to look at the front page of today's RJ that talked about the stress that we're experiencing now because we're concerned about the lack of teachers that are necessary right now for CCSD. This is an ecosystem of which we're all a part of. No one element stands out on its own. As I've already mentioned, quality of life issues are important. You have to have a very strong business environment. You have to have professional and social networks. I want to really congratulate and thank Tina for her comment earlier. Organizations like LVGA and our chambers and our churches and other places are so critical for convening, bringing people together to have the conversations of relevance. So here's my challenge to all of us who are in these spaces. Let's stop having these types of gatherings. We come in and pat ourselves on the back all the time. Y'all may not do that here. I'm sorry, I'm still learning the greater Las Vegas area. Excuse me if I'm stepping out of time here. But let me just offer to you that what we have to start doing is having the critical conversations with the action plans that come after that, right? Not just simply saying, this is the problem, and then none of us walk away with solutions to deal with it. Access to capital is critical, particularly for the entrepreneurs who are going to build the businesses that we need to have here. And finally, research. Monroe noted that the presence of world-class research universities like Berkeley and Stanford in Silicon Valley were particularly important. And he talked about the fact that these institutions bring industry experts, and the faculty, staff, and students, they create a knowledge environment that really helps propel the community. I'd offer to you the fact that our region has a R1 here. I celebrate that. I choose to be a part of a system that has UNLV in it. I choose to be in a system that has DRI in it. I choose to be in a system that has a world-class state college. I choose to be in a system that has a world-class community college. This is a part of the ecosystem that we have to be thinking about. Each of these elements work in concert. So rather than focusing on the individual, and this is where the problem happens, y'all. I don't know about y'all, but we all kind of focus on our little part, the thing that speaks to us. Oh, I'm a business person. I want to talk about business processes and efficiencies. Oh, I'm a community activist. I want to focus on this. Oh, I'm an association. I want to talk about this. Here's the dirty secret, y'all. It all works together. And if we're only focusing on one part, we're missing the big picture. So if we have to recognize that this is not a zero-sum game, we have to focus on this fact that these elements are essential to a collective growth and advancement. And the whole purpose of that framework, the Tappan-Monroe Advance, is to help our region get out of a boom or bust cycle. We can't be complacent about any of the elements of the ecosystem, and we have to work on the fact that talent is essential. We cannot be complacent. So you might be thinking, Darian, all right, you done told us some of these issues, and we saw that you did some stuff in DMV. You told us about Silicon Valley, but this is the Las Vegas region. We're different. We got a different little swagger to us. We're battle-born. What happens here stays here. All the different ones. I'm still learning them everywhere I go. I want to offer to you, though, that there are some other peers that we might look at to help figure this out. Our friends at Applied Analysis gave us some good data to help us think about this, the Hatchman Index. And they talk about this in terms of economic diversity. The slides will be available to you in a different space, but what they talk about here is it compares Phoenix, Orlando, and Las Vegas. The more economically diverse your economy is, the higher the score, all the way up to the 100, excuse me. And the more dependent your economy is on the single industry or industries, the lower your score. So there's some interesting trends here. You can see that if you look at our buddies Phoenix, who are in blue, they developed a big lead on us in terms of industrial or industry diversity, as well as Orlando, which is in red. I want you to take a moment, though, to look at the red and the green lines. Orlando, much like Las Vegas, has a thriving tourism industry. And just like Vegas with casinos, Orlando had to shut down because of the happiest place in the world couldn't defeat COVID as well. So with tourism shut down, our score shot up only briefly because tourism completely removed them from the equation. Now, don't worry too much, though, about Orlando, because they have an interesting story to tell. Since COVID, if you look at the numbers here, you can actually see that we've slowed in our progress of diversification, while Orlando, another economy that emphasizes tourism, has continued to improve. So Orlando, much like Las Vegas, got a big wake-up call after 9/11. Orlando sought out a renewed interest in economic diversification, and in 2006, They opened up the new College of Medicine at UCF, which has helped accelerate the healthcare industry sectors there. And again, like Orlando, there's an important thing that they recognize they need to change the way that they were seen. They couldn't continue to be just the happiest place on earth, so they invested deeply in economic development, and they actually recruited a Disney executive to lead a branch of branding executives to come in and launch a new business brand for the region, not just Orlando, but the region itself. And they pivoted away from attracting industries, but rather to attracting skills. After the pandemic, they worked to publish a skills-based hiring report to not only demonstrate what skills they were needed in the region, but they then worked with their higher educational institutions to have the correct language that reflected those skills. And they've narrowed down those skills to both skill sets and families of skills for now and into the future as they think about how they're defining their region. If you look at Phoenix, who is our neighbor here in the Southwest, what they've done is to create a more sustainable economy. And we all saw when Intel broke ground on a $20 billion semiconductor facility. This is the largest in Arizona's history and will create 15,000 jobs. The investment is so big that Forbes magazine labeled Arizona as semiconductor central. So it's no coincidence that they made that investment there, we believe, because we know that they have invested deeply in Phoenix in talent development. You only have to look at ASU and the robust community college system there to see that there is indeed a commitment around talent development. So a lot of folks say, which is first, the chicken or the egg? Do you recruit the business and build the talent, or do you build the talent and then recruit the business? Can I offer y'all a different reality? We got to be doing both at the same time. We are complex human beings. We got to be able to do more than one thing at a time. So we've got to be able to think about how do we build the ecosystem that attracts businesses here? How do we retain the ones that we have here? And how do we have the talent that's going to be necessary to do that? So much so that the Arizona Board of Regents for their higher ed system put together the New Economy Initiative, which focused on workforce in the next decade. Just note to self, something we might think about in this region. Finally, Silicon Slopes. I hadn't heard about this one until I moved here because it was a pretty big issue to think about. We know that this refers to the Provo Salt Lake area in Utah, which has been able to attract high-profile tech companies. Obviously, the high quality of life, those people who enjoy outdoor spaces and think you should sweat in public. And of course, not my truth at all. And they also have the tech transfer colleges that are located within the BYU system. Now, I don't want to leave you here thinking that I'm suggesting that our region needs to become the next Silicon Valley. I'm not even sure the Silicon Slopes thinks they should be the next Silicon Valley. But what I think is they offer both an inspiration and a cautionary tale about the ecosystem that we want to aspire to. And I think it tells us that there's some things that we should be thinking about in our region. So if I were to offer to you a call to action, I want to suggest to you there's some challenges that we cannot afford to ignore and a few things that give me hope. Our challenges. We cannot be complacent. I don't think that anyone in this room is satisfied with where we are right now. And we can't keep getting excited when we see headlines that say gaming is going well. While we celebrate our gaming industry, we can't continue to let our economy be determined by games of chance. We have to be far more deliberate. Second is automation. A study this year suggested about half of all jobs in this region were at high risk of automation. This is certainly something that we need to get ahead of. And third, as I mentioned before, we must make deep investments and commitments to our education system, both K-12 through higher education. If we don't do that, we will bear significant consequences, not just in the 8 years that Tina mentioned. We're going to be talking about in the immediate future right here. But there are significant opportunities. Thank you for the amen. Moving to these opportunities, I want to come back to investments. States are spending big right now by using their ARPA dollars in higher education. Just to highlight a few of these on here, as I looked at this list, just on this front page alone, Florida is investing more than almost $3 billion in higher education. I'm just going to let that sit there. Something to be thinking about. I also, as I mentioned earlier, we have to be talking about market diversity. Vegas's demographics are somewhere where the rest of the country is going to be in 2050. We can use our deep competency and our recognition of this as a way to help propel us and to change our narrative. I'm optimistic that we can do this. In fact, I've already started taking major steps with my own institution and the higher education space, being a part of helping us have these conversations. But I'm really optimistic because I think there's a collective conversation and recognition that's happening right now. As I shared with Tina earlier, the fact that there are a number of us who are all working together, not in isolation to have these conversations, is important. There has to be, though, a profound sense of urgency about this. Not waiting, oh, the economy's will be all right. Y'all, those of you who study economy, you know the recession is coming. What's going to be our story at that point? We've got to have some different ways of moving forward and thinking deliberately about that. There's a collective momentum. Look what we did and what LVGA led in terms of our Build Back Better grant. There's a different synergy that's happening here. Let's capitalize at that, and yes, let's flip the script so that we're thinking differently about how we do this work. I've spent some time talking with some folks over the last several weeks as I came here, and they offered me some perspectives, and I said, I'm going to share these anonymously. I'm a better listener than I am speaker. And as a listener, I heard several themes that you'll see here. I asked them, what do we need to be paying close attention to? Almost to a person, they said the talent development cycle. How do we attract and retain if we don't put our image and our focus on there? Leaders should not forget the influence that the transportation infrastructure and investment can have on that. Absent sustainable infrastructure that accommodates people, goods, and services, a community cannot thrive. Another one told me that mobility is the greatest equalizer. You cannot have equitable impact if you can't get to where you need to go. Amen. Hallelujah. This one got me a lot too, because they talk about, again, the ecosystem. You have to talk about professional and personal growth for all residents. Ultimately, a more inclusive economy means that you have to be thinking about self-actualization for everyone. If we are truly committed to workforce development, we have to talk about funding education. We have to talk about Medicaid reimbursement to state employees' salaries, to economic vitality. All of these things work together regarding the future of our region. This one really, and I left this a whole because I'm going to read this one. Prior to the pandemic, we know where Southern Nevada ranked nationally in education outcomes, workforce readiness, infrastructure, etc. Now we have an opportunity to use unprecedented federal dollars to completely change our region's future. We must have the courage to make strategic, long-term, people-based investments attractive, because we know this is essential to our area. If you look at that last line, this is the part that's interesting to me. Similar federal dollars are flowing to our competitors. How do you think they're going to show up? This is an important thing and a moment for us as a region. I have profound confidence, though, that we have the ability in this region to flip the script. We've done it. We've reinvented ourselves all the time. And I'll end by a little story that I hope illustrates this thoughtfully. I had a friend of mine who called me one day, and he had an epiphany. And I said, what's your epiphany? That's one of my favorite words. I just love to say it, epiphany. Maybe because it reminds me of Tiffany's. Anyway. And he said to me, Darian, he said, I called my wife. He said I had to run up to the 3rd floor of the building. He's a little bit heavier guy. He said I got to the top and I was sweating and I felt some kind of clamminess. And he called his wife and said, "Wife, I think I got a cardiac issue." She said, "Why, baby?" He said, "I ran up 3-4 flights of stairs and I broke out into a sweat and I felt all clammy and I think I got a heart problem." And she's a cardiac nurse. So she says to him, "Well, baby, how were you 5 minutes afterwards?" And he said, "Oh, I was fine." He said, "I sat down." He said, I recognize I'm okay." And she said, "Baby, cardiac health is not measured in the midst of the stress. Cardiac health is measured in recovery." Some of y'all got that, right? So he's an org theory guy, and he got all excited about this. He said, if we apply this, he said, if you look at an EKG, healthy EKGs, you just want to see it consistent, right? He said, the problem is in a lot of our who have bad cardiac health, we have a bad EKG where it has this big ups and downs all over, and big spaces, and all these things. We want to get to this point. So in my mind, flipping the script is about getting our EKG as a culture, and an ecosystem consistent, where resiliency is not in the fact of how we overreact to the stress of the moment, but how we think about our resiliency and recovery afterwards so that the stress doesn't set us back in a way that we're unable to recover from. I chose to come to this region because I believe in our ability to do this work. I'm committed to the work of the institution I have the profound honor of leading, and I look forward to working with each of you and being a part of the solution. Thank you.
Ready?
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage Betsy Fretwell of Switch to introduce our next speaker.
Isn't she incredible? Darian, great job. Great points for us to consider and think about as we move forward. It's my honor this morning to introduce our next speaker. As Tina mentioned in her opening comments, we had an opportunity to spend some time with her last night to kind of get prepped up for the conversation today about one of our vital resources, water. And Tina indicated this morning that we've got some challenges. Dr. Pollard just talked about the talent challenges, but opportunities. And now we're going to listen to a world-renowned expert on water policy, resource, and resource management. We are really lucky to have Cindy Wallace-Lage here with us this morning to talk through these significant issues. She is with Black & Veatch. I won't tell you how long she's been there. She can tell you herself. But let me tell you, this lady has done stuff around this world. She is an incredible resource for us this morning. I am so pleased to have her here. Please come to the stage, Cindy. We can't wait to hear from you.
Well, good morning. Wow, I have to say, following great speakers always just intimidates me. I think about what a fantastic message that you shared with us today. And it's awesome, and what I'm probably even more pleased with is there's some commonalities and some touch points that I think will really be valuable for us, and we think about how this all works together. So I am, again, very pleased to be here to talk about water industry, water security. It is a passion of mine. Very thoughtful, not to mention how many years, but I have been in this industry for 36 years. I have worked all over the globe. And the importance of water, the critical role it plays in communities and their success cannot be understated. And it's critical for this community also. So I thought about, how do I convey that? How do you get that message across that people can hear what I'm saying? I can talk all day, but if you don't hear me, it's not going to have the impact that we need. So I thought about the business and leadership development book that was written by Marshall Goldsmith. And he had a thought process. that was talking about how we evolve and how we grow as leaders. And I'm pretty sure that most of you, either in your leadership development or the growth of your business, had the opportunities to see that the steps that you took, the behaviors, the assumptions that you had that got to you to a certain point, you realize were no longer going to serve you well to continue to grow. And that's where we have many of the communities around the globe looking at where they are at and understanding that their path of how they got here is not how they're going to get there. And by there, it means that we're going to have sustainable and economically sound communities. And what does that mean? And how do we bring water, such a critical piece, into that conversation? So, what got us here won't get us there is our theme. And we're going to use the key points of the book to talk about what does that mean. So starting with the trouble with success, the habits that can hold us back when we don't like to change, but also understanding how we can change for the better and how we pull out the stops and make it work and get to that best practices for a desert community. So let's start with the trouble with success. It's pretty obvious, the trouble with success. We want to repeat it. Who doesn't, right? When you're doing, it's working, don't mess with the formula. We've got it, we like it. It's giving us the success that we need to continue to grow. And like Las Vegas, many communities around the globe have had this ability to continue to grow, to adapt. Several comments from Tina were about how there's resilience and to continue to adapt and how we can grow. And there's been growth in the community. But one of the key assumptions has been that there is some abundance, that there is adequate, maybe not abundance, but there is adequate water supply. And that has come from some dedicated work, right? There's been changes that have happened. Driving Zeroscape, looking at water recycling, driving efficient appliances, making sure that we're looking at how we are going to source water, putting in the third intake, those types of things to have that ability to say, we got this on water. But the reality is, things are changing. And we have to remember that for all of those change and all those things that we want to keep doing and growing, we can't forget that water security is foundational to economic growth. Water, the role water plays is ubiquitous in all that we do. It's essential for our human health. It drives economic development, the jobs, the industries that we want to attract into a community, the quality of life that people want to experience, mentioned many times over by Dr. Pollard. We need to be thinking about also the role that it plays in our food production, sustaining our food for our society. And then underpins that environmental and social equity that makes sure that everyone has opportunity. So we have to think holistically about how do we create that security? How do we ensure that we can attract and we can retain people in our community because they can have the quality of life that they want for a given community? And I say that because we have to also remember that not every community is the same. You cannot pick up and say, I'm from Kansas City. I cannot take my lifestyle that I have in Kansas City and say, I deserve to have the exact same lifestyle if I live in Vegas. It is a different place. We have to incorporate into that messaging indigenous living, understanding where we are, not just thinking about the way we maybe want things to be. Because our water supplies are not infinite. They are finite. And they are not predictable. We are seeing drastic changes in our climates. We are seeing hydrological changes that are moving our water and how we receive that water overall in our climate. We're seeing changes in snowpack, the quantity, the quality, and that's having an impact on our water supply. And we have to be cognizant of that. We have to remember that things are changing. We have to change with it. We don't control that piece. And that's the part that is so difficult. And that's why we have to think about what is that change mean? And I use the word here, drying climate, and it's an intentional point. Because when we say drought, and everybody talks about, oh, we have a severe drought, it's a longer drought than we thought. We're saying we think this will end. We're saying that we're going to go back to where we were. And that's not the case. We are a drying climate. It is a shift. We have seen things, we have created a new normal for us. And you add population increase, and for Las Vegas, you run in the additional challenges of what are alternative supplies in a landlocked state. There are challenges that we have to really own up to and think about the changes that we're going to have to make to be able to deal with the changes in our supply. Which takes us to the habits that hold us back. Why don't we embrace change? And our challenge is because we fundamentally don't like it when we don't control it. Change is great. It's like, if I want to change, that's all good. You tell me to change, like, what are you talking about? I don't need to change. I'm fine. What are you seeing? I don't think so. It's denial. I don't see anything different. I don't see what I need to do differently. Or it's an unrealistic optimism that gets you to that point of, I'm sure it'll be fine. I mean, it'll be good. I mean, it's always been good, right? Have we always survived? We've always survived. It's been fine. We don't need to deal with that. I'm going to assume the best. It's positive intent. No, it's lying to yourself. It is saying it's not, I don't have to do something different. And so we have to get to a point that we are realistic. It doesn't mean pessimistic. It means we're realistic on what we need to do differently, because change is upon us, and it's here for quite some time. We are seeing changes in our climate. Las Vegas is one of those cities that is seeing rising temperatures. We're seeing rising temperatures around the globe in many locations, and it has an impact on the amount of water that we have. It has an impact on the ecology. It has an impact where we've seen increasing fires. We have seen the impact that it's having on really a depletion of Arctic ice. We're seeing challenges, many places that are facing rising sea levels and how they're going to manage that. The change is upon us that we need to do things differently. We need to do a blend. We have to adapt, because there's some changes that are not going to change. We're not going to be able to reverse them. And then at the same time, we're doing everything we can to mitigate, because we don't want to cross that 2 degrees Celsius line. I would also say that it's important to remember what we're really seeing as major impacts and why this matters so much to water. So there's an organization called the World Economic Forum. They gather every year, and they talk about what are the major risks to society, risks to communities, to countries. It's global. I think it's 100+ countries, and it is economists, it is government leaders, it is scientists, it is business leaders, and it is engineers, all kinds of people that are bringing together and thinking holistically about what makes a society successful and what are the risks that we are seeing. And they look at them as an impact, and they look at how likely. So how big would that impact be to a community, and how likely is it to happen? Because those are the things we really got to pay attention to. Second year in a row that the environment tops it in almost every category. Yes, the pandemic came in, infectious disease, I can see that one. We've experienced it. But in the past couple of years, the environment continues to reside as the top risk in both impact and likelihood. And all of those have an impact to water. I would say in the last year, definitely this year, I have seen more headlines than I've ever seen in my career about water globally and the challenges that communities are facing, the increased risk they're having of water security. I have this one in here about 2 Texas towns running out of water. It's true, and that was in 2012. and they continue to have struggles. Towns will run out of water. Towns do close down because they haven't thought through and managed appropriately and responsibly the water supply for their community. Businesses leave. Once businesses leave, people have to leave. They aren't going to be sustainable in that location. And Texas right now is back into, I'm just talking to a friend of mine who lives in Houston, who's now gone to level 1 restrictions, getting ready for level 2 restrictions, not sure where that's going to end. There's also a headline on here from Iraq, which is talking about a lake that went completely dry. The part of this that hurts me the most is that it was preventable. It was choices that were made because there were other economic priorities. And those economic priorities are very short-lived. It's a short-term plan because when you run out of water, you have an economic impact that is beyond what you can control. We talked about Arizona and Phoenix and the growth that they have. This is a really tough topic for me on this one because I think Arizona has kind of the positive and the negative, I think, of how they've managed their water. And they are dealing with a water shock. Not so much in Tucson. Tucson has been very, very progressive and aggressive at how they manage their water, doing many of the things that Las Vegas has been doing to make sure that they are optimizing and valuing every drop. Phoenix has made choices that I believe are more short-term, and they're going to be facing a reckoning at some point because they're going to have to figure out how they're going to manage that water supply. They haven't been as responsible, in my mind, in dealing with the fact that they live in a desert. I lived there for a few years. I was in shock at that. And I've done plenty of work there. And so it's probably a blend, again, going back almost to the Iraq story, of thinking of the economic things in the short term and benefits, but forgetting that there is one key resource that is going to impact those decisions. We talked about Salt Lake, and the Great Salt Lake that's drying up. I think it's about a third right now of what it had been, and the impact that that's going to have on that community. And the impact's twofold. One, it's a water supply, and so they are making some better decisions and trying to get more restrictive of what businesses they bring in and looking at them from a water footprint and impact, putting in recycling. But yet they haven't made the steps to say, we really need to stop having so much grass. We haven't put restrictions in about appliances and getting water-efficient appliances. And so the impact can be their water supply and ultimately the quality of life there, but there's another piece there. The drying of that lake is creating potential environmental hazard for decades to come because of the dust that will come, because it's very heavily laden with metals, and the impact that that can have on the quality of life of that community. So that water has two purposes. One is to protect the air quality and to provide the water quality. And as it shrinks, the impact is going to be significant. And California gets to be in the news all the time for so many reasons, but one of them is their continued challenge in Southern California. Specifically, they have challenges throughout the state with their water supply, and that they have said that they are now going to have to impose mandates because they had asked to be able to reduce that water supply. And what happened? People didn't. They didn't reduce. In fact, they actually saw an uptick. And so they're now going to have to mandate, and it's going to be serious. If you look at this graphic and you see where the demand is at and where their water supply is, they have a gap that's significant. And it's going to have an impact. It's going to have significant impact and disrupt businesses and households and how they operate. So I want to tell a story, and I'm going to tell a story of two different cities and approaches. And the first one is going to be with Brisbane. And so you can see where Brisbane is located on the eastern shore of Australia. And then I'm going to talk about Western Australia, which is that large yellow piece, which is about a third of the country, which is one state. Australia is bigger than the United States, and they only have 7 states. So maybe that's a way that they can get along a little bit better than we can with 50. But as we look at Brisbane, Brisbane is located in Queensland, known as the Sunshine State. high tourism. It's a lovely climate. People love to be there. And they have continued to have significant growth. Over about a 2-decade period, they more than doubled their population from 1.1 million to 2.7 million. And a majority of that population does live in Brisbane. And so the challenge that they had early on in 2000 or so is they started to see and experience some drought conditions. And they'd had some drought before, so it was kind of like, yeah, okay. And the water level starts to drop in Wivenhoe Dam. And Wivenhoe Dam is the primary water supply for the city. And then in 2004, while the dam had dropped, it had been at around 60% is where I started this at 2002-03, and then it drops, but then it rains, and they're like, see, it rained. We knew it would rain. We were good. We didn't need to do anything. But it didn't fill up the reservoir. It just got it back up. It just kind of topped it up a little bit. And then they continued to have drought conditions and lose their water supply. And this is where there was significant challenge in the thinking process, which came back into that unrealistic optimism. It's gonna rain. Don't you think it's gonna rain? Yeah, I think it's gonna rain. I mean, it always rains, right? Yeah, it rains. And it's gonna rain. I mean, we don't need to do anything. We just need to hunker down and we'll make it through and it'll rain and all be good. And then it got to 30% level of capacity, something I'm sure that sounds very familiar to you. And they looked at this and realized they were running out of water and they did not have a backup. As a result, they were then having to make some very significant investments in a very, very quick way. They looked at putting in recycling, which they had never done, they hadn't even talked about doing. They had to put in desalination, which they hadn't done before either. They were looking at alternative groundwater supplies and how could they get those to the community. Because they had to make quick decisions because that type of infrastructure doesn't happen quickly. And they were running out of time. And at the same time, then they said, we have to really reduce our demand. And so the community then had to bear the burden very quickly of very abrupt changes to their lifestyles, something that they weren't prepared for. And level 1 through 5 restrictions, and it seemed like every time you turned on the radio or the TV, somebody said, we're going to the next level of restrictions. They ultimately did hit and have to survive at a level 5 restriction for quite some time. Their level 5 restriction was, 1, household usage was limited to 37 gallons per person per day. That's a third of what you have right now in Las Vegas. People had swimming pools, were restricted. Outdoor fountains were turned off. No outdoor hose bibs, no outdoor watering. It was a 4-minute shower. They send out timers, like the egg timers. Like, this is how long you've got in the shower. Be quick. I was very fortunate we didn't live there because my daughter would never, ever have survived. And we would have all give up our shower time just to manage. And so as they went through that, as you can imagine, there's an anger. There's an anger at the community, at the leaders, saying, how could you? How could you put us in this position? We have no voice. We have no choice. You're now going to force us to do recycling, and I don't trust the science. I don't understand what you're doing. I think you're playing with my health. And the premier said, you don't even get to vote because we're running out of water. We don't survive if we don't have it. And so there was this forced piece onto a community that made them very angry and had some long-term bitterness and some political backlash over time. And it ended up because they didn't get to the head and the heart, right? They were listening. They're like, okay, in my head, they're telling me I have to do it. I have to do it. But in my heart, I'm thinking, I don't agree with you. I can't buy into this. And it was very difficult. Very reactive stance. Ended up increasing their water supply costs. So communities are now paying $9 per 1,000 gallons, which is about double on average what gets paid here. And then they did learn a lesson, though, that they did not significantly increase their per capita use. They're up to around 50, 51 now. So a very great story to learn from and to take that to say we can do better, right? Because the greatest danger that we have right now and we think about what else we need to do and how we need to change, is that we think about how we got here, not where we need to go. So when we think about the turbulence that we're dealing with climate change and what's impacting us as a community, we need to make sure that we don't act with yesterday's logic, which takes us to the story of Perth and Water Corporation, which is in Western Australia. Very different approach. 2010, they're doing their 50-year water plan. And they identified that they thought they were fine. They went back, they did the historical, so we've always done it. We look back decades of water. This is how much water we've had. They're a surface water community. This is how much flow comes into our reservoirs. This is what we think we need as a demand. We're in pretty good shape. A little bit of a delta, but overall, thinking they're in pretty good shape. Good news for them is they had a new general manager who wasn't from the water industry, and they showed him what they're done, and he said, "Why is that true?" He said, "Well, it's because we've always done it." "Why would you look back that far?" "Well, it's because that's what we always do. History is our indicator of where we will be because we know what's happened in the past." And he said, "I don't think so. I don't think that's what the data says. I want you to relook at the data. I want you to get much, much more detailed into this data, break it up and look at really are there trends." When they broke it up, they saw that around 1935 to 1980, they had 400 gigaliters of water a year coming in. That's around 100 billion gallons per year that was coming into their reservoirs. But I looked at 1980 to 2000, it was half of that. And I looked at the last 10 years, it was cut in half again. So actually, the last 10 years told them that they were a quarter of what they had been really through a lot of their history. And it was for a 30-year period that showed it is dropping all the time. So their mindset was, yeah, we've had this discussion where we're just in a drought. No, 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 no. It's a shift. It's a drying climate. We cannot operate the way we have been in the past. A very proactive then step to educate the community, to engage head and heart, ultimately hands, to say we want to be part of the solution. We are here as a community. Every one of us, our actions matter. As they looked at putting in recycling, educating the population, why we're doing that, what does it look like, how is it going to be impacted, how are we verifying that it's a safe practice. It was bringing in desalination, because they were coastal, that they had the opportunity to do that. But it was looking at how they reduced their demand, and making sure everybody was a part of that, because they loved their community and they wanted it to survive. I love the title of their water plan, which is Water Forever, Whatever the Weather, which is really hard to say, and don't do it after a drink. But it is important because what they were saying is they wanted to disconnect their reliance on climate. And they were able to do so, but it took everyone to be a part of that solution. Because we have to have holistic planning, and that's what they did. Everybody matters. Everything we do matters. We have to be holistic because otherwise we can have unintended consequences. We can be looking at certain economic drivers or where we think trends are going in an industry, and we can be driving that way and realize that we missed a key point and someone's going to lose. We don't want to lose. We want to win, where everyone wins. It may cause pain in places for all of us, but ultimately we win because we're able to find a way to maximize the value of the drop that's going to allow continued investments into our communities, continued growth, and continued driving that quality of life that all people want in the community that they live. But we have to look at every element, every piece, bring it to play. We have to embrace change. We have to say that it's good. We can get really caught in the negative of change, thinking that change is a bad thing that's happening to us, as opposed to embracing and saying, what are we going to take from this? How are we going to be different? Many of the comments from Dr. Pollard of saying, what are we going to embrace that's going to make us better? Because we're open and we're thinking differently and we're embracing the opportunity to do something different. We understand there's risk. We understand there's cost. But we also know that staying as is, that comfortable position, is not going to get us there where we want to be. And I say these things also with the framework, remembering that this has been going on for a long time. And that isn't to give us a comfort zone and we don't have to do anything. It's to remind us how important water is, because we have identified this for decades. Back in 1966, comment to saying how important water is, the quality of water, the right water at the right place at the right time, because it is essential for health, for recreation, and for economic growth. So we have to create the roadmap. Just like the roadmap thinking about for how we're going to develop the workforce and what we need to do to be able to embrace new skills, new businesses, new growth in a community, we also have to say, what is that roadmap that's going to allow us to enable it? We want to enable that opportunity. We're not trying to restrict, but we understand there's limitations. The community here is not the same community as living in a very water-rich location, the northwest or northeast part of the country where there's too much water oftentimes. It's different. We have to plan differently. We have to think about what resiliency means for us. We have to have that big picture and be willing to make choices. We have to look at how we evolve and transform our communities to a different mindset such they understand what it means to be sustainable, what it means to allow us to have that ability to keep growing. And we have to be integrated and collaborate. No one can do this alone. No one, no entity, no person. It takes everyone in a community. I loved Tina's comment earlier. I mean, this is an incredible group that can drive this messaging and what needs to be done, and keeping it in our minds as a factor and something that we have to always be aware of, because water is so critical. It has to be thinking about the value of the drop all the time. How do we optimize that value? And there has been some been created or alternatives that have been put forward of what can be done. If you look back to 2007, very, I think, proactive stance to say, we're continuing to see changes on the Colorado River. How are the 7 states going to adjust? What are the alternatives? It wasn't to make a recommendation, but rather it was to say what can be done. And there were 12 different options that were identified into different groups. So how do we firm up supply? So that's looking at water reuse. It's understanding how we can continue to make changes into the community with Zeroscape and other things that are going to give us additional capacity, that's going to be able to give us that supply that we need. It's looking at new supplies, interbasin transfers. It was looking at production water from coal methane. It was looking at weather seeding the clouds, looking at alternatives to be able to increase how we would adapt the weather to try and give us more water. It was also then looking at water use efficiency, looking at consumptive use. How are we going to change that such that we are reducing on how much water that we're using for our power supplies. It's looking for other elements where we could change out technologies such that it would allow us to have greater efficiency. And then those were evaluated and looked at to say, okay, let's understand the technology, let's understand the regulatory impacts, let's understand the environmental impacts, the permitting requirements, it's how reliable that source is going to be, it's understanding the quantity and the quality of that water, it is understanding the location, where would it come from, and then it's also understanding what the cost is, so that that information is available. And it's continued, and there are pieces of it as you look at the report that you can see that have been implemented over time. So the reality is we have to make change. And that report was about how would we make change. And some of those changes are going to be disruptive. We're not going to like them, but we're going to embrace them because it's going to give us that sustainability that we need. Some of them are going to be incremental. The thing is that we've got to understand that some of them that are uncomfortable, that we don't like them, we have to embrace those. And we have to make sure that we're thinking that the choices that we make, they are robust, that they are going to make a difference, that we are going to think of them as they are inclusive, that everybody's part of the solution, everybody's engaged. Nobody gets left behind, nobody gets the big advantage. They are inclusive in how we're going to operate. It's going to make sure that it's looking across that full community of benefits that we have. And at the end of the day, it's also going to be responsible. And this is such an important word because, there's that saying, adulting is hard because you now have to be responsible. There's this video I've seen a little kid going around like, oh, I got responsibilities now. I can't have any fun. No, that isn't the way it has to be. But we do have to be responsible. We do have to be realistic. We do have to accept our role and what it takes to drive resilience. And I love that you used resilience earlier because it's such an important piece. And I believe in Vegas, and I believe in what Tina noted. This can be done, but it takes change. It means we have to have responsible planning. It means we have to have adaptive behaviors. We can't just keep doing what we've done to this point. We need to keep looking at technology. That's the skill sets we need to have to understand what can we do differently. And that's different in how we manage our water, how we treat our water potentially. It's looking at the businesses that are using that water. How do we help them bring in new technology such that they use less water? There's tremendous opportunity out there in businesses that have made significant changes to allow themselves to significantly reduce their water footprint. And we have to increase our digital information and integration as we look at water so that we realize where every drop is, how it's being utilized. One of the biggest challenges that we have in the water industry as a whole is water loss that can come from leaky pipes, water loss that comes from leaky data. I know if we're not capturing all of that, we're putting ourselves at a disadvantage for that responsible planning and the resilience to make sure that we can survive. So I leave you with two things to just remember in the decisions that you make, the choices that you consider, that every drop matters. Every drop. We don't get to just waste this over here. We have to consider its value. And then every action that we take counts. It's going to have an impact. No action is an impact and not acceptable. And so I tell you these things not to say of doom and gloom, but rather to understand how you create your own future. There's tremendous tenacity in Las Vegas to adapt, to adjust, to be able to create new opportunities. And this is another opportunity for you, but you have to be grounded in reality as to where your water supply is at and how to then showcase being the best in class of a desert community. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage Steve Westerman to introduce our final speaker of the morning.
Cindy, thank you so much. Super poignant, and I'll tell you, it's top of mind for everybody, and I think if it's not, it needs to be. And Tina and I had a conversation about not just how do we attract business to the Las Vegas area and the Valley, but how do we attract sustainable businesses? And I think that's got to be top of mind for us as well. And I know I'm Steve Westerman, for those of you who don't know, with Cox Business, and we're super proud to be a part of LVGEA. And I tell you, we are making major investments right now in sustainability. So I want to make sure we connect with Cindy after and have some conversations so I can put her in touch with our folks. But at any rate, there's really three things I want to say about Cox is one, we're committed to sustainability for sure. Number two is we're committed to the community that we serve, and we really want to make sure that we've got the right infrastructure to get investment in Las Vegas and businesses coming. But third, and probably just as important or more importantly, we want to serve the community and really close the digital divide. I'm working with many people in this room to try to solve for that, so more to come, and you'll see more about that. But now I've got the honor of introducing our final speaker today, Brian Gordon. Brian is the principal at Applied Analysis. It's a leading economic, fiscal, and policy research firm based here in Las Vegas. His areas of expertise include financial advisory services, business consulting, hospitality consulting, and economic modeling. He's also the principal author of the Las Vegas Quarterly Market Reports, covering office, industry, retail, apartment, and vacant land markets. In addition to all that, he's just an all-around good dude, too. So please help me welcome Brian.
All right, good morning, Las Vegas Perspective. How are we doing? Tina, you set me up. Yes, I follow these smart women, including yourself, so we'll see what we can do to keep the record going here. But really a great opportunity to be here. Thank you for having me. I'm the one that gets to share economic data with you, and so hopefully we're not too doom and gloom out of the gates, but the reality is we have to talk about what's happening in this country and from an economic perspective. We're going to get to some really good stuff as to what's happening here in the local market. So I'll share our thoughts in terms of what we're seeing here in the nation as a whole. We're going to jump right into it and really give you our perspective on what's happening relative to what we're all feeling, right? Inflation, 8.6% overall inflation rate, pretty substantial in terms of where we're seeing prices and where we're seeing the costs increase, not only for us personally, but what we're seeing in our businesses, right? We're seeing a significant increase in the overall cost that we're incurring, and it's wreaking havoc for some of us in this community. There's no question about it. We're at a 40-year high in terms of overall inflation rates, pretty significant when you think about where we've been. Anything that's a 40-year high, we have a little bit of trouble dealing with, and we're trying to work through that. And where are we seeing it? We're seeing it everywhere that we go. Every element everything we buy, everything we use, everything we consume, right? And you can see the rates of increase that are taking place in terms of the overall price increases that we're experiencing. A lot of areas are feeling the pain, particularly in areas like transportation. No surprises, right? We're going to talk a little bit more about gas prices as we go forward. What is driving all of this? We've seen a significant amount of stimulus coming through the system that's driving demand and creating demand, and we've seen some overheated demand from a national economic perspective. On the other side of the equation, we're seeing supply chain constraints. It's having a major impact for all of us as we operate our businesses, and all of that is putting upward pressure on prices. And then we've got this little thing going on here in the middle, right? We've got international conflict, we've got oil prices through the roof, and this is having a major effect in terms of what we're experiencing from an inflation perspective. So let's jump into what we're seeing from a financial perspective and that stimulus that I've talked about. We've pumped trillions of dollars through our national economy, probably some of that for the right reasons, maybe some of that for the wrong reasons. Nonetheless, we've seen a lot of funding come through that system. It's creating elevated demand, and it was doing exactly what it was intended to do when COVID-19 took hold. Fortunately, we're continuing to do some of that, and it's having a negative reaction as it relates to overall inflation and the money supply that's flowing through our national economy. I want to take a look at a couple of elements related to that, and we have consumer spending that has followed on as a result of that stimulus funding coming through the system. Spending is at an all-time high, and we've continued to see that ramp. We've seen huge gains in terms of the amount of consumer spending taking place, and we're seeing it across the board, right? We pumped out some checks to some folks, and we saw that spending come really quick. Young folks running out to Apple stores to buy iPhones, right? It was, again, doing what it was intended. We burned through that capital pretty quickly. It did what it was supposed to do. We've stabilized the economy coming out of the COVID-19 pandemic, and that's where we're at today. Then we have some folks a little bit later in the cycle, the older demographic that felt a little bit more safe, coming out of their shell, traveling a bit more. We have now worked through that funding, and so now we're starting to see what happens as a result of that. Consumer credit, revolving credit cards, those sorts of things. We were all paying those down during the COVID-19 pandemic. And where we're at today is we've started to spend again. We're spending more like we were. We're now racking up those credit card bills, and we're getting back to kind of pre-pandemic levels. We're going to see where this takes off from here, but this has the potential to be a challenge in our economy. And then we think about how much folks are saving. Who's saving money today? We're now saving at less than 5% of their overall income. It's the lowest we've seen in more than a decade. We remember what that time frame was like when we were saving less. So we've got a lot of that money is continuing to flow through the economy, and that's what's contributing to some of these rising prices that we're experiencing. Does this look familiar? Anybody running into problems at the pumps? These are the gas prices in California last weekend. This was fun. $7 a gallon. A little bit scary, right? Here's where we may be by the end of the summer. It's going to be tough. And this is going to be a long road. I'm telling you right now, these gas prices aren't coming down anytime soon. And what are we seeing nationally? Average gas price hit $5 a gallon nationally. I know what you're thinking. I wish I was only paying $5 a gallon. That would be nice, right? This is the highest in our history, and so everybody across the country is feeling it, and now we're going to work to try and solve this issue. And what are we doing here in Nevada? The second highest gas prices in the country. You see the price per gallon, $5.63 per gallon. Pretty problematic for all of us, right? The state of Nevada every year consumes about 1.1 billion gallons of gasoline. That's a lot of gas. If gas prices are up $1 a gallon over the course of a year, we're talking about $1 billion of money that is being extracted out of our economy just for fuel prices. If it's up by $2 a gallon for a year, we're talking about over $2 billion of funding that is getting extracted out of the economy. You get the idea. These are pretty big numbers. So where are we at? Supply chain challenges, right? We've seen it everywhere. Started with toilet paper, and today we're down to baby formula, right? We're seeing it across the board. There's no question this is having an effect on everybody. And forget about trying to buy a car, right? We know where that ended up. Car dealerships with empty lots. Now you just go into a dealership to go into their nice air-conditioned showroom to get on a computer to order your car, and you wait for that to show up, and at some point you get your new car. That's kind of how it works today. The world has changed. It's much different than it once was. Supply chain constraints are playing a real role in terms of what's happening in the national economy. The Federal Reserve Chair. This might be the single most difficult job in the world today. Anybody want to take this job? I don't think so. Fed chairman, you've heard him talk a lot over the last several months, and I like to think about what it is he's been doing, what's going through his mind, what is it that the Federal Reserve is planning to do to try and curb inflation, what's the game plan here? So I think back really to the fall of last year when we started to see prices start to escalate. What happened at that point in time? The chairman's sitting back saying, yeah, we're seeing prices up a little bit. Not that bad, right? We've got this. We got this figured out. We'll be able to handle this. As soon as we start to see prices go up, we'll adjust interest rates, no problem. We'll be able to take hold of this. What happened maybe, let's think about January of this year, not that long ago. 6 months ago, we start to really see this thing take hold. And you know what he starts thinking? Now, this might be a bigger deal, right? Maybe if I cover my right eye, it'll only be half as bad. Maybe. February, a month later. Yep, this is a real head scratcher. What are we going to do now? Things got worse, right? We fast forward, we're March of 2020, just a few months ago. Then you really start wondering, are these things even working? Maybe I should take these off because we're not getting anywhere, right? This is getting really troubling. And then we get into maybe the May time frame, right? Then you just, I don't know, I'm going to give up. We are not making this happen very quickly. We've got rampant inflation. This is very problematic, and now I'm hearing about it every day, and I'm still wondering if I have a job, I suppose. I don't know. But where are we at today? This is the strategy. This is what we do. We pray. Or we raise interest rates, right? 3/4 of a point. This is the largest increase we've seen since 1994. We're going to ramp up the federal funds rate. We're going to get this economy under control. We'll raise interest rates. We're going to tamp down the economy. We'll tamp down inflation, and we'll be okay. We're going to do all of this without losing any jobs, right? That is the objective. That is what the Fed chair, his objective is right now, to try and cure that issue without losing jobs. That's a really tough needle to thread, I'm afraid, and we'll see how this plays out. So let me share with you where we're at from a Fed funds rate perspective. We're at a target at the high end of about 1.75%. You get the idea. We had a effective zero interest rate with the federal funds rate for nearly a decade. We start to see that great expansion. We saw rates ramping up, COVID-19 hits, and now where we're at today. And we're seeing this sharp increase, which is really creating a lot of concern for folks and having effects throughout the economy. But we take a look at our broader history and where we're at. We've been much higher than that historically and where we're at today. Nonetheless, that slope that we're experiencing in terms of that rise is pretty problematic. That's what the public sector is doing as it relates to inflation. What is the private sector doing? They also have a response to inflation. How do we deal with inflation in the private sector? Right? A lot of us do different things now that costs are higher. We rethink our business models. We do things just a little bit differently than we used to do that, right? We think of things like shrinkflation. You all familiar with this concept of shrinkflation? Okay, nobody apparently. I got it. This is it. You go into the convenience store, right? You get your bottle of Gatorade. It used to be 32 ounces. Now it's 28 ounces, and you pay the same exact price, right? This is how the private sector deals with it. Maybe the consumers won't know, right? Maybe they won't figure this out, that they're actually getting less, right? It's kind of how it works. Anyway, I hope when my wife gets back from Costco, I have normal-sized food now as a result of shrinkflation. So what do we have going on? We've got a lot of chaos happening in the marketplace from a national perspective, inflation, we've got interest rates rising, we continue to have this supply-demand imbalance that we're dealing with. It's creating a lot of challenges in the market, and we see what that looks like today. What does it look like? These sort of forward-looking indicators, what's happening in the equity markets. A lot of volatility, right? What are we seeing from a stock market perspective? What are investors expecting? We've moved from this bull market to a bear market, right? What is the definition of a bear market? It means the stock market's down by more than 20% from its high. We're now in that position. All of you are looking at your portfolios and your statements that are rolling in, and you want to just throw those in the trash, right? Because they don't make a whole lot of sense for you. But where are we at today? In terms of the S&P 500, for example, we're off of those peaks. We are down. We're down by more than 20%, as I mentioned. We've seen the weakness in the equity markets. We've seen the significant volatility. It's challenging for a lot of us to deal with, but we do have to take a little bit of a step back and look at this a little bit more in perspective relative to where we were. When we think about where we were at the start of the COVID-19 pandemic, we remember when the world shut down and we were looking at our stock portfolios at that particular time, and we all thought about selling everything because we thought the world was coming to an end. Little do we know we're ahead of where we were just 2.5 years ago. We're still better off than where we were, and you think about the historical trend lines and where we are. It's painful today, I get it, and I'm not telling you that it's done, but we're in a much better spot than we were. We've got a lot of work to do ahead of us, but really the opportunity is in front of us, and we'll see how ultimately we start to see some stabilization as we get inflation under control. But this is one of the X factors that we're all talking about. Recession, right? What is a recession? We used to have this rule of thumb, right? The economy contracts for 2 consecutive quarters. That means we're in a recession. That's just how the math had to work. There's no formula for it. Think about COVID-19. We were in a 2-month recession during March and April of 2020, right? We saw this two-month period of decline. One of the shortest recessions we've ever seen in our history. Nonetheless, economic contraction is a concern, and that has the potential to be a problem for all of us in this room, in our businesses and our organizations. There's really 3 scenarios that I like to think about in terms of what the recession might look like when that does happen, right? We have this concept of a soft landing. The Federal Reserve just says that, look, we're going to see some slower economic growth. GDP slows down, but we don't see it turn negative. So we have some slower economic growth. We have this soft landing. The second option is we have a hard landing. By definition, according to the Federal Reserve, we're down somewhere negative from an economic perspective. GDP growth turns negative in at least one of the next 10 quarters. That's where we're in this sort of hard landing perspective. And then the third option, the crash landing. We've been through the crash landing. That was not fun. We remember that? I don't think we're headed back there, that's for sure. But the Federal Reserve also surveys a number of nationally known economists and asks them, what is the likelihood of a recession over the next 12 months? And what is that going to look like? Are we going to have a soft landing? Are we going to have a hard landing? What does that look like? And so back in March of this year, we had 63% of those economists suggested we were going to have the soft landing. We were going to avoid the negative economic growth. Another 28% of folks thought that we were going to see a little bit of a harder landing. We'll see some negative GDP growth, and the rest, either they don't know, they think it's a hard crash landing. We don't know. They didn't fill in the bubble, I guess. Then we look at where we're at today. In June, this month, we had those same folks give us their gauge on what their expectations were in terms of how this economy is going to land. 10% say a soft landing, and now we've got 80% of folks suggesting that we're going to have a much harder landing of negative performance in terms of overall GDP growth. So the scenario is changing relatively quickly. And then we've got the Conference Board. They survey national CEOs across the country and get their opinions on about where we're at from a recession perspective. This one's a little bit scary. 60% of CEOs across the country are suggesting that we're going to see a recession in the next 12 to 18 months. 15%, in addition to that, already think we're in a recession today. That tells you 3/4 of CEOs believe a recession is either imminent or we're already there. A little bit scary, right? The private sector CEOs have some concerns. And then you have the Wall Street Journal that has historically conducted these surveys time in, time out in terms of what the expectations are for the chief economists of major organizations across the United States, and they get their feedback as well. A lot of surveys going on in this regard, right? 44% of those folks think we're on a course for a recession in the next 12 months. In every one of these presentations, I'm sorry, but we've got to have an eye test. This is it. Focus your attention on the bottom of the screen to start. This is the federal funds interest rate. You see it stretching from 0.4% all the way up to 1.8%, and every little dot in there are these 70 economists that report to the Wall Street Journal. The best of the best, right, in terms of these economic forecasters. They completed their survey in April of 2022. 2 months ago they did this. They were surveyed, asked their opinions, and they said, where do you think the federal funds interest rate is going to be? And you go left to right, and you can see where they're at. One of them said about 1.75 is probably the high end. I'm in the 1.6 range in terms of where I'm thinking the midpoint of the federal funds rate will be. You see that individual on the far right. Then they asked them a separate question and said, where do you think gross domestic product growth will be for the first quarter of 2022? They asked them this question in April of 2022. The quarter just ended a month ago when they asked them this question. The data wasn't out, and here's what they said. Top to bottom, right? You have some folks out there, you got a high flyer, thinks the economy was going to grow by 5% during the first quarter of this year. And then at the bottom end of the scale, you have one, she said, 1.4% negative growth. We only had 4 economists, nationally known economists around the country. 4 of them said we're going to have negative GDP growth in the first quarter. One of them said about 1.4%. They were the most conservative, most pessimistic of the group. You take all of those together, and this is what the average was. They said about 1.1% in the federal funds rate, and about 1.1% in terms of overall GDP growth. Right in the middle there is where the average fell in terms of the expectations of where the economy was headed. And then here's what actually happened. Right? The federal funds rate is now at 1.75, the high end of the target, the midpoint's in that 1.6 range. One person got that number right. By the way, he wasn't as pessimistic about the economy. He still thought we were going to have positive economic growth. And then you have the one at the bottom who thought we were going to be pretty pessimistic. She still didn't hit the number in terms of how deep we were in terms of the negative GDP growth. Nonetheless, the economy contracted by 1.5% during the first quarter of this year. We were already past the quarter, and none of these folks were able to make that prediction. My point is not to disparage these folks. This is very difficult. My point here is that things are moving very quickly. Things are changing rapidly. We've seen the interest rate escalate up to by 0.75%, the highest rate of increase we've seen since 1994. Things are happening very quickly, and so that's why we're all feeling a little bit of this uncertainty. That's what's happening here in the national economy. Here's the standard economic cycle chart, if you will. The ups, the downs, and then where recessions take hold, right? We start in the early segments of those cycles. You see some of the factors that exist. Then we see some growth. Then we see where we're at late in the cycle. The key one being here, tighter central banking policies, and inflation is above the target rate. That feels like it might be somewhere where we're at, right? And then where else could we be as a recession? We're probably somewhere between 3 and 4 if we're not already at 4. Nonetheless, I want to make this point. I do not expect us to see a repeat of where we were, thinking about the Great Recession and the fallout that ensued in 2008 and 2009. We are not there, and I don't expect that we'll be there. I think we're more apt to be in this soft landing, right? I'm not suggesting we're not going to see negative GDP growth, but I'm also not suggesting we're going to see significant fallout. We are not going to see that crash landing scenario. Somewhere in between. We will get through this, and probably the quicker we do, the better off we're all going to be for it. Now I want to just talk a little bit about some of the challenges and opportunities that my colleagues have been talking about up here today already, and a lot of the similar themes. I think the fact that we're all talking about some of these similar themes tells us that there's probably something to this, right? You've got a lot of smart folks here talking to you about what's happening in terms of water and responsibilities related to that. You're hearing a lot about education and other things and how we're dealing with our community in terms of talent and all of these things. We didn't coordinate our presentations today, but it certainly appears that we have. So let me walk you through a little bit what we're seeing from a tourism standpoint. I think this one is particularly important. The relative dependence of tourism, Las Vegas ranks the highest, right? We are the most tourism-dependent economy in the country. We will continue to be, and we will forever be, in the United States, the most tourism-dependent economy. Nobody has what we have built here. There is no Las Vegas Strip somewhere else. Nobody is going to be able to replicate that. That's both a positive and a negative, there's no doubt about it. And what have we seen from a visitation standpoint? We have been recovering relatively quickly, probably quicker than most people thought. We're at almost 40 million people that came to Las Vegas during the last 12 months, a significant number in terms of the quantity or the volume. There's certainly been some pent-up demand, no question about it, but we're within 16% of our high level pre-COVID. We are almost back. The tourism industry is doing extremely well, and we're doing it much different than we were. Historically, conventions and business travelers account for about 16% of the overall economy here in the tourism industry in Southern Nevada. 14% of those visitors are also international travelers. So 30% of all folks that come to Las Vegas from out of town, it's for meetings and conventions or it's for international travel. The balance of folks are coming for leisure-related activities, right? There's some crossover there, but what I'm telling you is that the biggest segment of the market hasn't even returned yet, and we're within 16% of our pre-COVID highs in terms of overall tourism. We are getting back, and we're doing it a bit different than we were. How are we doing it? Special events, sporting events, entertainment. We have changed the dynamic as it relates to the entertainment experience, what people are coming for. And we've done it with a lot of seat capacity. Right? We've seen a lot of development activity in terms of our infrastructure as it relates to all of these amenities, these opportunities that exist in our market, and we're seeing significant investments there, and we have a number of investments on the horizon as well. So I've talked to you about some of the challenges. What are some of the opportunities? We're diversifying within the industry, right? We're bringing things like Formula One to Las Vegas in November of 2023. I'm telling you right now, this is a big deal. This is a really big deal for this community. I don't know that these kinds of conversations were on the drawing board just 5 or 10 years ago. We are a major market and everybody wants to be here, right? Do we have opportunities for other things? There's other professional sports leagues out there that aren't here. Every major market has these professional sports leagues. We have some of them, we don't have all of them. There are a lot of opportunities here. We also are leveraging the existing assets that we have. We have this facility that we never had before that has allowed us to expand what it is we do. We can now bring in 65,000 people into this community for an event. This is not something we could do. We're able to attract the talent that fills buildings of that size. This is really important for the tourism industry here in Southern Nevada, and we're also building additional infrastructure. We're building in more infrastructure, things like MSG Sphere, almost a $2 billion project that is going to bring another unique set of customers into that building. A different experience and different types of talent and different types of programming that are going to continue to drive demand for Las Vegas as a destination. And then we've got to get these people here. I don't care how you do it. If it's a high-speed train, it's widening I-15, it's throwing people from LA in a rocket ship and getting them here. We got to find a good way to get them here quickly, whatever that looks like. And when they get here, let's get them around quickly so they can spend all their money as fast as they can, and let's get them out and get the next one here. That's how we got to do it. What else? Housing. This is near and dear to all of us in this room, right? The housing market here in Southern Nevada is critically important to us. And what are we seeing? We're seeing continued demand. This is a good thing from a demand standpoint. This is helping us out. We're continuing to see strong demand. We had almost 80,000 people that said, I'm going to move from somewhere else. I'm going to go to that DMV, different DMV, by the way, Department of Motor Vehicles. I'm going to exchange that out-of-state driver's license, and I'm going to go get my Nevada ID because I'm moving to Las Vegas. And so we had almost 80,000 people in the last 12 months that said they're going to make that decision to relocate to Las Vegas. This is a wonderful thing. This is driving demand in our housing market. Obviously, there's some consequences related to that, but we're continuing to see positive demand in the housing market. And this is what the average equity gain is by state. Where are we at in terms of how much equity all homeowners gained during the last 12 months? On average, every homeowner gained $91,000 in their house last year. I saw you clapping. I was looking right at you. I saw your hands go up. I love it too, right? All of us love it. Scary part is you open up that book, you turn to page 4, and you look and see what the average household income here in Las Vegas is, and it's $90,000. People made more money on their house last year than they made working their job. I agree. Again, tough though, right? We cannot continue. This is clearly not sustainable. We will continue to see some adjustments. I'm not suggesting we're going to see fallout like we did in the 2008, 9, and 10 time frames where housing prices are going to get cut in half. Could we see some air let out of the bubble? Sure, that's a possibility. Do we see a soft landing? Yes, I think that's the more likely scenario. Right? There's a lot of opportunity there as it relates to the housing market, but there are certainly challenges we're also dealing with. And this is one of them. Mortgage rates have jumped exponentially in the last 3 to 6 months. We have seen mortgage rates accelerate in terms of the increase and how quickly they're going up. And if we look at where they're at today relative to where we were just a few years ago, yes, they're moving upward. They're getting higher. It is problematic. And I'm going to walk you through an example, but if we look in our history, we're higher, but not as high as we've been. So this is going to be a delicate balancing act on a go-forward basis. We're going to have to figure this one out. This is a challenge for our housing market, and we're going to have to deal with it. This is my example. This is my homemade spreadsheet right here. Okay, we got a $400,000 loan. You plug in the formula. A year ago, interest rates were at 2.9%. Your mortgage payment on that house was almost $1,700 1 year ago. Today, mortgage rates have doubled. Your 30-year fixed mortgage interest rate has doubled in the last 12 months, and now what does your mortgage payment look like? It's almost $700 more than you were paying a year ago. So somebody that was sitting on the sidelines is really kicking themselves over this one, right? We've also seen the cost of homes go up during that same time frame. This is going to start to be reflected in what we're seeing in the housing market. The pool of potential buyers is going to shrink. Fortunately, for a lot of us that are sitting in our houses today, we're not moving. Why? Because we can't even afford to rebuy the house we're in today at today's prices. You've all thought about it. Hey, I got $500,000 in equity. Let's go move somewhere, honey. Nowhere to go, right? We're going to sit there and hang out in that house for the next decade. There's not going to be a lot of mobility in those houses, right? And if we do see some adjustments, everybody that owns those properties put real money in. This is much different than last cycle. People have put skin in the game, and it's going to be a much different environment going forward this go-around, should we see some sort of contraction. The Housing Opportunity Index, this is essentially your housing affordability index, if you want to think about it that way. Just over 40% of the folks in this community can afford the typical home, the median price home. Yes, it's a bigger issue. Yes, it's being a greater problem, and yes, it's going to be exacerbated by some of these higher interest rates. There's no question about it. But where were we at during the run-ups of the early to mid-2000s? It was a much different dynamic. We're not back there yet, and I think we'll probably see this start to flatten out. And who are the buyers? Those first-time home buyers. The average age of a typical first-time home buyer is about 35 years old. I like how that demographic aligns with when we look at what our population looks like. Here's the age distribution for every year of everybody that lives in this community. The biggest segment of the market are folks that are age 30 years old. We've got a big population that's leading into that first-time home buyer segment, so there's a real opportunity there. Pricing is the challenge. We're going to have to see how that plays out. And from a rental perspective, there's no question. For sale market is up. The rental market is up. Both sides of the equation are escalating pretty quickly. The cost of development is obviously high. There's no opportunity to reduce that, given all the things I just talked about, supply chain constraints, and we're going to talk more about some of those things. And we have to be careful about not doing what other markets have done, particularly at this very fragile time in terms of limiting or having some intervening action. We need to be careful about how we think about that. There are some unintended consequences to some of those actions. We need to be thinking about that and be very thoughtful about how we go about some of these policies to shore up the challenges that some of our residents in this community are facing. Where are the opportunities? Look, I love the demographics and where we're headed. I think there's a real strong alignment there in terms of the aging of our population and folks that are looking to get into the housing market. Again, adjustments may be necessary, but nonetheless, we've got a strong group that's coming through the pipeline. We also are seeing some other affordable housing options. The state of Nevada investing $500 million in the Home Means Nevada initiative. There are some things happening. We'll see how those play out over the next several years in terms of the investments to support affordable housing options. And then we really need to think about raising the bar. We need to think about how we build and what we do and how we live differently, right? Thinking about some of the major markets around the United States. Think of those major downtowns. What do they look like? They look much different than our community. This can happen in our downtowns. This can happen in our suburban areas. It's going to take time. It takes a sort of a rethinking about how we go about development activity and building the neighborhoods that people want. They want to have these walkable environments, things of that nature. All of those are possibilities. This doesn't happen overnight, but there are opportunities down the road we should be thinking about. You see that visual of that high density type of development leads me right into the land question, right? Land availability. Tina mentioned it at the outset. Land development is a challenge for us, and land availability is a bigger problem for us. And we think about the population growth that we've seen historically and what is it going to look like on a go-forward basis. We have been one of the fastest growing economies in the country. We will continue to be one of the fastest growing economies in the country. We are going to continue to see people taking that California driver's license and moving to Las Vegas, exchanging those, taking in Las Vegas as their permanent residence. There's no doubt that that's going to continue to happen. But this is the Las Vegas Valley, day one. Here's where we are as we move forward and we accelerate in terms of the development activity that's taken place. You continue to see the expansion of population and residential and commercial development continue to press out towards the periphery of the Las Vegas Valley, right? We see all of those buildings under construction around the 215 and beyond. We are moving to the periphery of the valley, and we're moving towards that de facto boundary that limits our future potential for growth. These are all the federal lands within the urban Las Vegas Valley that are just on the outside. What does that mean? We can't build there. We've got limitations in terms of where we can go. You see all these folks that fly in on those airplanes, and they look and they see all that land. They wonder why we're not bigger. Well, this is one of the reasons. And what do? We look at what's happening across the entire county. This is Clark County. 87% of those lands are owned by the federal government. Really makes a challenge to continue to develop out this community in the same fashion that we have. This community has been built for growth, and that's going to be difficult on a go-forward basis. We had the opportunity to work with the Southern Nevada Home Builders Association on this. We took a look at land availability overall. We looked at the Multi-Species Habitat Conservation Plan, the MSHCP. This is the plan that helps to protect endangered species. We're all familiar with this. Developers are particularly familiar with this because they pay a permit fee every time they want to move dirt, right? Anytime you want to develop property, you pay this permit. And what that allows us to do is really track how much acreage has been developed historically when this program was put in place in 2001 and where we're at today. We saw the run-ups during the massive amount of expansion that we saw in the early 2000s. We saw where that played out during the slowdown and where we're at today. Chewing through about 4,000 to 5,000 acres of land every year. There's about 150,000 acres that are available under that take permit, and so you get a sense of how much availability that means. And then we look at cumulatively where we're at. We've worked through about 100,000 acres under that permit, suggesting we've got about 50,000 acres remaining. And this is the projection in terms of where we're going to be. This is the absorption of residential and non-residential land. So all of that coming together in terms of the future growth. Yes, the growth rate is going to slow. We're going to see a little bit slower growth in overall terms, but this is the amount of land that we expect to be absorbed, assuming no limitations in where we go forward from here. But if we look at what remains, we see by the year 2032, we actually run out of land for all uses. Tina's commercial property land that she's referring to, the residential land in aggregate, we're talking about 11 years worth of developable property that remains here in the urban Las Vegas Valley. If we continue to build out at our current densities and the pace of population growth that we're expecting today. Now, the county is doing a great job. They're working on the MSHCP today. They are doing things to change this dynamic, but we also have other challenges of the actual land besides just the permitting processes that are in place. So there's some challenges there. There's certainly some opportunities there, and we need to think about what those opportunities are. The federal lands bill going through the system today, we need to see some more momentum there. Obviously, we want to have capacity to develop things like major warehouse buildings like you see here, not just for the sake of building, but they're in demand today. We want to meet that demand, but we really want to focus smarter on other things like advanced manufacturing, the opportunities that are there. We don't need to just build for the sake of building, we need to build smarter. We're hearing a lot about water today, those types of things. We need to be rethinking how we go about some of that, but the reality is we're going to be out of land either way, so we need to focus our attention there. Amending the MSHCP, I told you that already. I saw Yolanda here today. The county is doing a great job in terms of working through that process and understanding what the challenges are that exist from a land perspective. And then we need to think about how we build differently. Maybe high-density development isn't for everybody. Maybe it's not the right thing for everybody that's in this room today, but on a go-forward basis, it's a much more efficient use of that land, right? We have an opportunity to fill the demand for housing on a smaller footprint. That's certainly an opportunity for us here. We need to be thinking about that differently. There's no question about it. And then when you talk about higher density development and more growth, we think about land, right? We've just heard all about the water challenges that are out there. The reality is we're going to have to deal with that, and you heard all the reasons why, so I'll leave it to those experts, but all I want to say is we've got problems, right? You don't see that every day, right? We are definitely in a precarious situation. We've got challenges as it relates to water availability. We can see what it's been like over the last several years and the decline in the overall lake levels. Again, I don't need to give you a repeat, but we're getting pretty close, right? Heard Commissioner Jones here this morning talking about the fact that this is not hyperbole. This is reality, and something needs to be done. And I think the SNWA and others are trying to do that, but really it's probably going to take all of us, right? Who's using the water today? I don't know, about 60% of it is in residential use. Let's be clear. We're all in our houses a lot more than we are anywhere else, so we're using a lot of the water there. Nonetheless, it's everywhere, right? We're seeing it in commercial and industrial. We're seeing it in golf courses. We're seeing it in schools. Everybody uses water. Everybody is going to have to be part of that solution. There's no question. And we've done a great job. Here's your consumption on a per day basis. Think about where we were a decade ago and where we're at today, how much water people are using. We're using much less water than we were. We've done a great job on that. We've taken out front yards. We've done all sorts of things that change the dynamic here while our population has continued to grow. We need to do more, though. They're throwing out targets that are much lower than this that we need to hit, and we're going to have to be responsive to that. Again, the Home Builders Association had us take a look at how much water are houses using. We looked at homes built in 4 different decades and said, how much water are they using today? Homes built 4 decades ago using over 150,000 gallons on average, and homes built today, they're using about 96,000 gallons a year, right? We've seen a pretty significant reduction in terms of the amount of water use. What that tells me is new homes are being developed and they're much more efficient for a number of reasons, right? The efficiency measures put within the house, we have smaller lot sizes, we don't have turf, all of those sorts of things, right? Water use is down about 37%. Today's homes being built are even bigger than the ones that were built 1, 2, or 3 decades ago. So what does that mean on a per square foot basis? Today's homes are much more efficient than they were. They're using about half the water that homes built just a couple of decades were using. We're in a much better spot as it relates to the new development activity. So we hear all of these rants and things on television that tell us we need to stop building. Stop building is not the answer. We need to be smart about how we're building. This is only one fraction of the issue that we're dealing with from a water standpoint. We need to be thinking more creatively about it. And we look at how that water is being used between consumptive use and non-consumptive use, right? We're all familiar with those terms. Everything that goes down the drain, we get back to Lake Mead, we get that back. We have those return flow credits, right? That's really important to us. That non-consumptive use that's going into the ground and going away forever, we don't get back, right? Those older homes that are using that water, it's problematic. We need to find a cure for some of that. So there's certainly challenges on the water side. There are some opportunities, and I talked about this and touched on it a little bit, but this is what I like to say, conserving and converting. A lot of this is going to have to take place for all of us, right? For all of us to make this work. There's no question about that. And then I talk about sustainable development. Big buildings like this probably scare us and seem like this may not be the right thing. And I'm not here to tell you it's financially feasible today, but we need to be thinking about how we build a little bit differently. All of that water use taking place in buildings like this goes right down the drain and comes back to us with those return flow credits, right? So there's an opportunity here to build a lot smarter than we were, a lot smarter than we have been, and so there's certainly an opportunity there from a water standpoint. Talent, you've heard it. Talent is important. We've got the 700 smartest people in the Southern Nevada market sitting in this room. We got to figure this out, right? What does our talent pool look like? Look, from a jobs perspective, we're almost back, right? We've been able to weather the storm. We're getting back to where we were. And if we think about what was happening at the trough of the cycle, the bottom of COVID-19 and where we're at today, we've added almost 300,000 jobs back. But where are we at from pre-COVID peak levels? We're still off a little bit, 15,000 jobs, and no surprises, leisure and hospitality is leading the way, right? That market is a little bit different. We don't have all of the visitors back. They've adjusted their business models because they've had to, and so we're seeing a lot of recovery, but we have some way to go there. And the mix of jobs are changing, thankfully. We're seeing some mix shifts that are taking place, and from an unemployment rate standpoint, you get at the high level in terms of where we're at. The single most important challenge facing small businesses today, the folks at Nevada State Bank did a survey of small businesses, many of you in this room, asking them, what is the biggest challenge that you face today? And what do they tell us? Talent, right? Hiring and retaining employees is the biggest challenge that they are facing today. Every business in this community is facing that today. There's too few people relative to the jobs that exist. This is the biggest challenge. This was a bigger challenge for businesses than getting customers. They said talent was the biggest thing they faced that they just couldn't overcome. Part of the reason is labor participation rates. How many people are working in the labor force? Here's where we were at pre-COVID. We've seen the declines in terms of how many people are in the market. All that means is we've got over 40,000 fewer people that are able to participate in the market. Yes, we had a lot of people retire early because they could at the time. Stock market was high, housing values are high, they're sick of working and dealing with the public. They're done. They retired early, right? So they're out of the job market. But what else are we seeing happening? You have families that are sitting there with one worker, maybe that was in a two-worker household. They said, I'm going to go take care of the kids while you go to work because it just makes more financial sense, and this is just a different lifestyle we've become accustomed to. You also have some businesses that really haven't come back all the way. Maybe that job isn't there. Sure, that's a possibility, and this is my favorite. Yes, there are 25-year-old kids sitting on the couch playing video games all day long. I am telling you right now, this is not going to last. We talked about recessions, we talked about corrections, we're talking about all of that. This environment cannot last forever. We will continue to see adjustments in terms of people's willingness, their ability, their desire to get back into the workforce. It's a different dynamic. I know we're all dealing with that in our businesses today. We have twice as many people looking for jobs than there are twice as many job opportunities, I should say, than there are people actually looking for jobs. This imbalance is what's driving this unique time in our economy and in our job market. And where are we seeing shortfalls? Leisure and hospitality is one of the biggest. That's our core tourism industry. Finding folks to fill that need has been a challenge. Probably part of the reason we haven't seen all of those jobs come back. So talent is a major challenge for us. It's also probably our biggest opportunity. Tina hit on it already. Dr. Pollard has talked about it. Talent is what we need. Talent is what's going to drive this economy forward. Talent is what we're going to have to focus on a go-forward basis. Workforce development, folks at Nevada Workforce Connections, folks at CSN, folks at Nevada State College, all of those that are making investments in our people. These are important, critically important, to getting people with the right skills, upskilling, reskilling, moving people from traditionally low-wage jobs into some of these higher wage-earning opportunities. You've already heard about healthcare and all sorts of other areas that we need to focus our attention. Innovation in our infrastructure, finding ways to get people to work quicker, more efficient, building the ecosystem that we need, right, to be able to move the economy forward from a talent perspective so that we can attract those folks. You see it in other major markets. We need that type of thing here in Southern Nevada. And then where do we leave off at education, right? This is the big one that we always continue to come back to, oftentimes at the end of presentations like this. This is a challenge. This is something we have to fix. This is something we have to continue to work on. This is a challenge that we will face. We have oftentimes been very reactive as opposed to proactive on these types of things. We have a major issue. We wait till it gets really bad, and then we'll say, okay, let's do something. Let's be more proactive. Reactive in that situation. We need to be more proactive on a go-forward basis. So I'll sort of leave you with this. Look, I believe this is the time in our history. This is time for us to grow up. That 25-year-old sitting on the couch playing video games, it's time to grow up. This community needs to grow up. We've done a lot of it already. We've done a lot of that. We've made great strides. We're not there yet. We have a long way to go. I talk about building this economy. Our economy is built for growth, right? That's what we've been historically. We may not be that on a go-forward basis, but we need to be able to develop a community that makes sense and people want to live in so we can continue to be attractive. It's time to make bold decisions. It's time to move the economy forward. It's time to grow up. It's time to start acting our age, right? We need to get back to something that people will be proud of in terms of wanting to come to this community. We all love it. That's why we're here. Not everybody else knows it. They read headlines and they hear things in the newspaper, the media, and they have concerns about our community. You hear about HQ2 and what folks like that are looking for. Yeah, we submitted a proposal to Amazon to try and attract them to this community. And you just heard Dr. Pollard talk about the number of things that they were focused on. We're falling behind in a number of those, and we need to make great strides. So it's going to take this room of folks to make those investments in. We look forward to joining you in that journey on a go-forward basis. So thank you for the opportunity. Tina, I want to say thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I want to say thank you to LVGEA, the team, the prospective council members, everybody that put their money up to make this thing happen. This team. Got it? Make a difference.
Thank you, Brian.
Thank you.
Well, some fun messages, some very hard messages today. I'd like to say one thing. Don't kill the messenger, okay? There's folks out there like Commissioner Gibson, John Ensminger, Marilyn Kirkpatrick, Yolanda King, who are having to share very hard messages with our community. And while Brian says grow up, I think we have been growing. We've got well over 100 years of history here. And I would like to suggest that we really need to focus on a few key things based on what I heard today. We need to build out that ecosystem where everyone wins. We need to focus on our own resiliency. Let's not forget that every drop counts. Get in the game, be realistic but optimistic, and be a part of the solution. Tina hit on it this morning. We've been here before. Brian alluded to the Habitat Conservation Program. We had the desert tortoise practically stop us in our tracks in the 90s. We figured it out. We innovated when gaming went global. We survived that. We survived the Great Recession, and we grew 10 points on that Hatchman Index. That kind of goes unspoken. I'm pretty proud of it because I was city manager during that period of time. And this man right here, Glenn Christensen, Steve Hill, Brian Sandoval, and a bunch of others got together and figured out a way to move the needle. We can do this. We are prepared for these water challenges. We have had great leaders and we have current great leaders who prepared us for this day. We are not Brisbane. We are not Brisbane, and we should be really happy about that. That positions us for strength. So, I'm Betsy Fretwell. I'm the chair of the LVGEA. I hope you found this event incredibly informative. Please engage with us. Be a part of the solution. Most importantly, be resilient. Every drop matters. Let's be the indigenous dweller we need to be. and let's make everyone win together. Thank you very much.